Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second day of storytelling series. We have our reader for today, Miss Laverne Brooks. She will be telling the story of the port of Sandy Point and its anchorage. Good morning, Miss Brooks, and how are you?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning. So I am hoping that I will do justice to this. And we know that generally, or everybody would say that Sandy Point was the first town, which was and is incorrect. And Sandy Point, because long ago it had this point of sand jutting out into the sea down by the area which we call Belted. Man's influence on the environment as well as weathering. So that has changed. So the town of Sandy Point was the first major seaport on the island of St. Christopher. And we know that the shortened form for St. Christopher is St. Kitts. Right. So when people But if we were to look at it in terms of official documents, we will see St. Christopher. And so in the St. Kitts basically was discovered, and most persons, we don't like to use the term discovered, but we put it in inverted commas because there were persons who were here before. And you know the names of the persons who were here before Columbus came? What's the name of the group of people? Huh? What's the what we call them now? Huh? Right, the Kalinagos. So Saint Christopher Columbus met the Kalinagos on St. Kitts, which were the first group of indigenous people on the territory. So we are saying that St. Kitts became the first English territory in the region. Anybody know one of the names that they give to St. Kitts or St. Christopher apart from St. Kitts or St. Christopher? No? That's the indigenous name. Another name that they call it, the mother colony of the West Indies. Right, yeah. St. Kitts was called the mother colony, or is called the mother colony of the West Indies. And that is because it is from St. Kitts that they were able to go on to colonize Barbados, colonize Jamaica, right? So St. Kitts, Thomas Warner came, he settled on St. Kitts, and from there other colonizers were able to go on to Barbados and Jamaica and all of the other territories that would eventually become part of the British Empire, right? So St. Kitts was the first territory to be colonized by the English. And so we say that Sir Thomas Warner was the first, the first, word with a G? Governor, right. Give him a little clap. Yeah, the first governor of St. Kitts. And so Sandy Point, in most instances, what they did, they made Sandy Point because of the proximity to the sea, right? The area which we call Pompey. They were able to use that as what we will call a seaport, because in those days they did not have planes. So your travel was by sea. And so you came on a boat. So you came on your little boat. So you know when Columbus came and so on, they said that he had 3 ships. What were the names of the name of the ships? Columbus's 3 ships. The Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niner, right? Those were the 3 ships that he used on his voyages, on his first voyages to the New World, or what we call the West Indies. So Columbus came, all these people came, and then Sir Thomas Warner also came long after. Because when Sir Thomas Warner came, it was almost like a century and a half after Columbus would have made that connection, because that is where St. Kitts got the name, St. Christopher, from Christopher Columbus, right? So, what we are saying is that Sir Thomas Warner settled, he came, he landed in the area of Old Road. Everybody know where Old Road is? Yes. Right, so he landed in Old Road, and from there, they would have met another group of people, which were the French. So the French came, they settled, then the English came, they settled on the territory. So St. Kitts was shared between 2 countries. The French, so France, and Britain, they shared St. Kitts. So that is why we are now in the town of, where we at? Bastia, and Bastia is French, right? And then if you go on to Caon, which was Capistier, right? That's the French. So the French, basically, were at both ends of the islands. That is where you get Date Bay, right? So that is where you get these French names. And Molyneux, those are French names. So the English was in the middle, and the French at both ends of the island. And so Sir Thomas Warner, what he did is that Old Road was what we call the administrative capital. Just like how Bastia now is our administrative capital, where you find the parliament and all the businesses. In Bastia, Old Road was the administrative capital for the English settlement. And it is from there that they would go to Sandy Point. And Sandy Point was what you call a trading center. You know, when you trade, you have items that you either exchange or you would sell. So when you go to the supermarket, you go to trade. If you go to the market down in town or in Sandy Point, the farmers market, you go to trade. So Sandy Point became the trading center, while Bastia was the capital of St. Kitts. St. Kitts was what we call a plantation society or a plantation economy, meaning that when you travel, you will see that we used to plant sugar cane, right? You will see all the cane fields. We also had cotton before that, right? So sugar became king under what we will call like a sugar revolution. So everybody started to plant sugar in St. Kitts, and then other countries followed and started to plant sugar. So St. Kitts was what we call a plantation economy or a plantation society. And as a plantation society, Sandy Point became important to the English as it relates to trade. And so Sandy Point began to flourish, and we began to export things. So under Sir Thomas Warner, we began to export tobacco. And tobacco, everybody wanted tobacco because everybody was chewing tobacco or they were smoking tobacco, because the indigenous people used to use the tobacco in their religious ceremonies. So whenever they want to get in touch with God, right, their God, so they would go and they would inhale the tobacco, and they will become all what we will say hallucinate, and then they would get in touch with their gods, and then they will come back to the people and they will tell the people what the gods were saying. So when Sir Thomas Warner came, he recognized the importance of the tobacco, and so he began to plant tobacco also. And the tobacco now was exported to England, and they realized that it was now making a lot of monies. So that is why we say Sandy Point became a trading place, a place of trade. So when the ships came calling, they went to the port of Sandy Point. So the importance now of Sandy Point to the English was for trade. And so you find that unlike other English territories, the French towns, namely like French towns on the island, namely Old Road, Bastille, Keogh, and Sandy Point, they were all next, they had boundaries, right? Just like how you have your yard and your yard is fenced, and you have boundaries. Sandy Point had a boundary, Old Road had a boundary, the French part of the territories, they also had boundaries. And so those boundaries separated the English from the French. Just like how your fence separates you from your neighbor. So you have your boundaries, and that boundary was important to the French, and it was also important to the English. And so you find that those relationships became what we call hostile or antagonistic, because the French realized now the English came, and then the English wanted to take over the territory. You know, it's like you invite somebody to come to your home, and when you invite them as a guest at your home, you know what they do? They want to come and take over your house, which is wrong, because you invited them in. And when you invite them in, they're supposed to have that courtesy and say, my friend invited me, and so I would like to stay. But the English recognized the importance of St. Kitts and what they could do as it relates to having settlement, because St. Kitts became a settlement for the English, a settlement for the French. And so what you find is that the relationship was always about these boundaries, that the English was crossing the boundaries that the French had allowed them to occupy in the territories. And so you find that the northern boundary between St. Christophe and St. Christopher ran through the Bay of Sandy Point and only contributed to more hostility. So if you're from Sandy Point, or if you know anything about Sandy Point, you would hear people talk about Pump Bay, right? So Pump Bay is on that long strip when you're going down to the area of Fig Tree. In Fig Tree you will find Beltet, and then you'll find what we call Love Valley. So those are two communities beyond that belong to the French. And so you find that Sandy Point Anchorage is one of the largest in the Eastern Caribbean. So we live in what we call the Eastern Caribbean, or if we live in the Leeward Islands, and St. Kitts is part of the Leeward Islands. Or we will say we are part of the Northern Caribbean because of where we are located on the map. So when you go to school and you do your social studies, your teacher will teach you about the location, the latitude, longitude, where we are located from the equator. Then they will tell you about the Leeward Islands, the Windward Islands, the Caribbean. We are located as part of the OECS, the CARICOM territories. And so you will get an idea of what we are talking about in terms of the development and the establishment of Sandy Point. And so you find that in terms of the size of Bastille Anchorage, they talk about Orangestead in, say, Statia. You know, like when you go to Sandy Point and you're going on to, like, say, Date Bay Passing Ground, when you look out, you just see little islands outside. You will see Statia and Sabre. And on a clear day, you might see St. Bart's, depending on how clear the day is. But the two territories that we see from Sandy Point is Sabre and St. Eustatius, but we don't just say Statia for short. Because you know that in the territories, we tend to find little names for the territories. And then you have Prince Rupert Bay in Dominica. Dominica is in the Windward Islands. Then we have Carlisle Bay and Spicetown Anchorage in Barbados. And Barbados is in, we like to say it's part of the Caribbean, but it is actually in the Atlantic Ocean. It is just outside the chain of islands. So when you look on your little map, you're going to see an island just outside the chain of islands, and that is Barbados over in the Atlantic Ocean. But it is part of the Caribbean because of its history, because of its political systems, and also because of its culture. So that is why it is classified as Caribbean also. And the size of Sandy Point Anchorage and its location has always been contested. And it has been contested by the French mainly. And that is because the French were the first to occupy the territory of St. Kitts. So when the English came, the English started to now carve up St. Kitts like it was their own. So it's like you invite somebody in your house, and the person start to carve up your house. Start to take up a room and cordon off your little room and say, this is my place. But it is your house. And so that in itself can lead to problems, because you're going to say, but I invite my friend to my house and then my friend take up my room. How you would feel if your friend take up your room? You going to feel good? Right. So the French felt like these people had come and they came and they're taking up our space, they're taking up our territory, and so the French became hostile, and so the French wanted to fight. Because if somebody come and take up your territory or take up your thing, you're going to want it back, right? Yes. Right. So if you want it back, what are you going to do? You're going to plan. And you're going to plan how you are going to take back your territory. And so you find that the anchorage became a strategic strategy for the English in the territory. And so you find that, as we just say, in the 1700s, none of us existed. Our ancestors existed. Our grandparents, great-grandparents, none of us existed, right? Because most of you were born like in 2000, right? I was born in like the 1900s. I'm not that older. But, so you were born in the 21st century. I was born in the 20th century, right? Ain't sound so bad, not so far down in the 20th century, but close, right? So, Sandy Point Anchorage became what we call a fortification. And whenever you hear people talk about a fortification, you always think about a protected area where they would put the cannons. Because in those days, when you went to war, you did not have the kind of like war planes and that kind of thing that you see on the TV with the fight between Ukraine and Russia. You had to use cannons. So if you have ever been to Brimstone Hill, any of you ever been to Brimstone Hill? Right? And you see the cannons on, right? You see the cannons on the hill. So the cannons is what they use. And so they build up these walls and they call them fortifications. Because you have to hide yourselves from the enemy. So you have to make sure that the enemy did not see you. Because if the enemy came and you had no fortification, you would be overrun. So Sandy Point Anchorage became heavily fortified on both sides because you wanted to protect yourselves. So within the territories, the French did not like it. And the French felt that, I invite you, you come, and now you put up a fortification in my place. So you're basically saying to me that if you try anything, we are going to have a war. And that war could lead to people dying, right? Even children, because people came out with their families. And you came at a time when you wanted to really enjoy, the nice, beautiful sunshine and the sea. Because, the Caribbean is extremely beautiful. Where we live, people come to visit. They want to see the beaches and they want to see the rainforest. And they want to enjoy, the little chickens that they see walk around and the sheep and the goats, right? And the cattle that we take for granted. And the mango, when you have a mango tree in your yard and the mangoes drop, you don't even bother with them. But people come in now to see that as part of our heritage within our society. And so you find that the village of Fig Tree was located in what you call Fort Francois. You see the French names coming out? Right. And opposite to that was Fort Charles. And there were actually two Fort Charles, right? So Fort Charles, you cannot see it from the road when you look down from Brimstone Hill. You actually have to go to the fortification in order to see it. And so Fort Charles was named after Charles II. In those days, England had kings, and sometimes they had queens. But Fort Charles was named for Charles II. And Charles II, they had a nickname for him. They called him the Merry Monarch. He was always happy, even though England was facing a religious war. So the Anglicans, anybody in here go Anglican church? Anybody in here is Catholic? You don't go Anglican church, Amir? All right. You don't go Catholic church? Right. So the Anglicans and the Catholics, they were fighting a religious war because Catholicism was the dominant religion, and then you had this group of people who called themselves Protestants, who called themselves Anglicans, began to have this war. And so Charles II had to make sure that, keep the peace between these people, the Anglicans and the Catholics within the society. And then you had those who did not neither believe in Anglicanism or Catholicism, and they referred to them as the dissenters. So they were outside Catholicism and Anglicanism within the society. However, Charles II decided, I am going to pay out of my pocket for the building of Fort Charles, because he realized that Fort Charles was important to maintaining St. Kitts for the English, because that was the plan all along, to take St. Kitts for the English, because you invite them in and now you realize they're vulnerable. So Fort Charles, the English began to control the territories, and so they were able to push out the French, and so by 1713, the English took over the territory. And in taking it over, the fort was still a source of confusion, but at the same time, the English knew that they would have it for themselves. And so you find that over the period of time, the names start to shift over, but eventually, the fort remained as Fort Charles. However, there was this fort. They recognized that in order for us to be able to effectively defeat these people, we have to make sure that we protect our fort. And so you find that they start to compare the fort to like the fort in Dominica, Fort Delgre in Guadeloupe. You have heard the name Guadeloupe of a territory, a French territory. Martinique is a French territory. St. Bartholomew is also a French territory, right? And so what they did basically is that they began to recognize that the fort was too low. Fort Charles was too low, and the possibility exists that whenever they had any kind of incursion by any European power, whether it be the Spanish, the French, the Dutch was still in the territories, the Portuguese, that we could be overrun. And so you find that they decided we will construct the fort, and so the fort took 11 years. 11 years to build. An entire 11 years. Because in those days, you took precision in your construction, in your technology. And these forts still exist, even after almost 500 years. And so you find that the crown and the colonies decided that what we will do, we will look at how our fort was built. And when the French invaded St. Kitts, they recognized that Fort Charles was vulnerable. And so with the help of our ancestors, the Africans that they would have trafficked from Africa and brought them to the Caribbean and enslaved them. So don't let anybody tell you that slaves came from Africa. They brought humans, they trafficked them, right? People got them, They brought them across the Atlantic Ocean and they trafficked the persons and then they sold them into slavery. And that is why people like us live in the Caribbean. Because of our ancestors who were enslaved persons. So you find that the enslaved Africans were able to take like the cannons and all of the other ammunitions and they were able to pull them up the hill to Brimstone Hill. Any of you ever walk up Brimstone Hill? Yeah. And you know it's difficult, right? When you walk up the hill, not drive. It's a difficult journey. So our ancestors were able to pull the cannons up the hill, right? And when they were up on that height, they were able to see over the bay of Sandy Point. And that is where they realized the advantage of height. So Brimstone Hill, they decided that what we will do, we will build a fortification on Brimstone Hill. And that is why Brimstone Hill is called what? What you call Brimstone Hill? Brimstone Hill? Fortress. Fortress? No. What's the correct name? Brimstone Hill? Huh? Come on now. Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park. Right? And you know when it got its name? In 1980? Huh? 83. Right. So, give it a clap, man. Give yourselves a clap. You know your history. Right. So, Brimstone Hill became a major part of the fortification of the Sandy Point anchorage. And when you look at Brimstone Hill and you say, I wonder who built Brimstone Hill. It was the Africans that were trafficked from Africa who became enslaved persons in St. Kitts. They were the ones who built the fortifications. So Sandy Point anchorage, as part of our history, our ancestors contributed to its construction. So Sandy Point became a very impressive place. And that is why Sandy Point people like to say, they don't make it sound like Sandy Point is not a part of St. Kitts. Because of the history of Sandy Point. So you hear people say, I am going to the town of Sandy Point. They don't say that they're going to town. When they come into Bastille, they will say, I'm going to Bastille. Because Sandy Point people will let you know that Sandy Point is a town. But it was a trading port. So what you had was that over the period of time, over 300 years, Brimstone Hill would withstand the test of time and continue to be a part of our national heritage, and it has been our major defensive position in the 19th century when persons tried to invade the territory. What we also need to recognize is that Sandy Point has what we call or refer to as a natural geographical feature and the expansive, what we call the buff area. You know, when we talk about this area as a buff area and we talk about our territory, we need to recognize that Sandy Point is key to our development. When we talk about a buff area, it's like a cliff. So if you have ever been down, you'll hear them talk about Cleverly Hill. You'll hear them talk about La Valley. You'll hear them talk about the fortifications within our territory. And so you find that Sandy Point is part of our major heritage. And so you find that if you go to France, right, in the museum, in the National Library of France, you're going to see pictures of Sandy Point that date back to 500 years or go back 600 years, 400 years when they drew the picture of Sandy Point. And so you find that what has happened basically is that we need to understand the importance of Sandy Point to the development of St. Kitts. And so in the 19th century, Sandy Point became what you call a slave trading port. You all know the story of slave trading? You ever heard about this man called John Newton? You know the song Amazing Grace? Yes. You know the song Amazing Grace? How you know the song? That you go to church Sunday school and they teach you the song? That was written by John Newton? No? Parents, you know the song, right? Yes. Right, Amazing Grace, how sweet thou art, that save a wretch like me. You know the song? It was written by a slave trader, John Newton. When he found God, when he realized that all the things that he was doing was wrong. So he said God was able to save him, the grace of God. So when you go home, tell your parents to play the little song for you. It was a man, a captain of a ship who traded slaves or enslaved persons. He engaged in human trafficking. And when he realized that he was committing a sin, he decided that he would become a Christian, and then he wrote the song, Amazing Grace, how sweet thou art. And so you find that the British and the Dutch and the Spanish and the French, they engage in human trafficking, taking people from their homelands in Africa and bringing them to the Caribbean. And so what they did basically is that within Sandy Point, there was a place called the Pound. You know, normally when we talk about a pound, we think that the pound is where you carry animals. Right? But the Pound was actually a place where they auctioned the enslaved persons. And when they auctioned the enslaved persons, what they would do, when they bring them, they would wash them up. They would wash up the enslaved persons. They rub them up with oil and stuff like that. And then they will bring them up and people would bid. And so you will go and you will bid whether 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds for that individual. So that is how our ancestors were sold into slavery. And if you were sick or you were unwell as a human cargo, then they just sold you by scramble. So they just say, you could take how many you want and just give us a small amount of money. And that was very terrifying for the enslaved people. And so you find that people will talk about the Pound being like Downing Street. Well, as a child, I knew the Pound to be an area in the gut. So we used to call it the Pound Yard. But we thought that the Pound Yard was just a general area where everybody lived in an open yard system. It is only when you got older and you did history, you realized that the Pound was where they kept the enslaved until they auctioned them off or sold them into slavery. And so the Pound was this large expanse area where enslaved persons were kept in Sandy Point. And so you find that there are some persons who dispute the story that the Pound was used for trading. Most persons think that trading took part in the square only, but remember that Sandy Point was a trading port where we actually had what we'll call a pier, and where persons came into the pier. As a child, there was a pier. There is none now because of the transformations. And so you find that in 1779, the French tried to take back St. Kitts again for themselves. Yeah, they came and they tried to take it back after what we call the Anglo-French Wars. There was this war, and in 1763, the English had taken away a lot of territories from the French, from the Dutch. But in 1779, the French decided that, you know what? I want to take back St. Kitts from the English. And so they invaded St. Kitts again. But however, that did not, the British was able to react quickly, and they sent a dispatchment, and they were able to make sure that they protect St. Kitts from the French. And so the French, that was the last time the French actually tried. And so you find that Sandy Point by 1802, basically, you had what we will call like a military base in the area of Dietbe with soldiers, because the British were a bit fearful that the French would come again, and so they kept a number of soldiers on the island to prevent them from taking over the territory. And so you find that the French didn't give up. In 1782, again, the French invaded St. Kitts, and Sandy Point again found itself at the front of defending the territory from the French. And so you find that the forces within the territories, they tried as much as possible, to get into. So what the English had to do was to sign a number of treaties with the French, settling the matter over St. Kitts and making sure that the British legacy continued to live on in St. Kitts, and that Sandy Point basically became the primary area from which St. Kitts was defended, using Brimstone Hill as the main fortification. And what we need to also recognize is that as St. Kitts became a territory that the British had total control over, people from the surrounding territories began to come and trade with St. Kitts. So people from Statia, from St. Eustatius, people from Sabre, people from what we call St. Bartholomew, now St. Bart's, they would come to Sandy Point, and so boats would move between Sandy Point and the surrounding territories. People used to trade legally and illegally. So you would hear people say they're smuggling. As a child, people would say people used to go to smuggle. But in those days, you went by fishing boat to the surrounding communities. And so what we need to take away from it is that Sandy Point was an integral part of the development of St. Kitts as a British territory. And that is how Sandy Point became famous for its anchorage. Everybody got that? Right. You enjoy the story about Sandy Point? All right. Give yourself a clap for me. For enjoy. All right. You have any questions? No? Yes? Any questions? No? So when the British landed on St. Kitts, what year? What year? No. The British? 1623. 23. Not 24. 1623. So anybody tell you 24? That's wrong. 1623. When the British landed. Right? Everybody know where Sir Thomas Warner tomb is? No? Where? You know where it is? Where? Huh? No? Just below Old Road? No? No, before that. So, Old Road, after Old Road is? Middle Island. Middle Island by the Anglican Church. When you see the little gazebo, right, that is where Sir Thomas Warner was buried, right? Yeah. You had nothing. You had the indigenous people. You also had the English on the territory. No. The British would send their troops to the islands. Yeah, the British would send their troops to the island to defend the territories. Right? And that is why they were able to build Brimstone Hill. To protect the territory so you could see them coming. And remember, Fort Thomas was also another fortification that they used to defend the territories. Amir? You have a question? You want to tell us something? No? All right. Any other questions? No? So when you go to school and your teacher talk about St. Kitts, you will have information so you could answer questions. All right? So thank you for your time. Give yourselves a round of applause. All right. And thank you for coming. So the next time when we come, we'll talk about the Kalinagos. The next story. Right? We'll come and we'll talk about the Kalinagos. Okay? Right. All right. Thank you.